I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the New School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Culinary Luminaries event on Pellegrino Artusi. I would like to tell you a little bit about the New School and about the Food Studies program before I turn it over to our moderator, Fabio Parasecoli. And I know that there are some faces that I recognize in the crowd here, so some of you have come to our Culinary Luminary events before. The Food Studies program at the New School was founded in the spring of 2008, and since then it's been our mission to join what I used to say was the emerging and burgeoning conversation about food, but now is the conversation about food that we pretty much take for granted, not only the gastronomic aspects of food, but also the policy, economic, sociological, nutritional aspects of food that our courses and our public programs in food studies aim to discuss. Tonight's event is one of our public events on seminal figures in culinary history. We started out with Julia Child. We've done James Beard, MFK Fisher, Craig Claiborne, which was a good one, and many others. And tonight we are doing our first Italian culinary luminary in honor of the first event being organized by our relatively new full-time professor in food studies, Fabio Parasecoli. And we will be doing another culinary luminary event in the fall, details to come. And we hope that you will take the opportunity before leaving to sign up for our announcements so that you can keep in touch with what's going on in food studies at the New School. I'd like to also bring to your attention, while I have your attention, the event that we're going to be doing on April 19th. That event is in conjunction with Edible Magazines. It's the Edible Institute, and the theme is on connecting urban buyers with rural producers of food. And I hope you will join us for that event. There's more information available on our website. Now, before I turn it over to Fabio, let me tell you a little bit about Fabio. He is the author of several books, including Food Culture in Italy, Bite Me, Food and Popular Culture, and he's the general editor of the six-volume Cultural History of Food, forthcoming this fall. Fabio has been with us since the fall of 2010, but he has been a presence in the New York City food studies world for quite some time, first at NYU, and with the Italian magazine Gambero Rossi before that as well. So please join me in welcoming Fabio, who will introduce the rest of our speakers tonight and get us started.
Thank you all much. Good evening. Thank you for coming out with this weather. I'm very pleased to see so many people. You know, when it snows or rains in New York, it becomes a little complicated. Before we start with the content of the evening, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'm really happy to have them here for this panel. All of them are extremely knowledgeable about Italian food, and I'm sure they will give you plenty of information about this book that maybe here in the US is not as known as it is in Italy. Already the name Pellegrino Artusi sounds a little exotic. Anyway, I'll start with with Michele, who's right here. She's a very well-known cookbook author and writer. She specializes, of course, in food and wine and travel. She's authored 15 cookbooks. The last one is The Italian Slow Cooker. She's worked with Chef Laurent Tourondel for the BLT cookbook. She's written Entertaining with the Sopranos, and before that, Sopranos Family Cookbook, co-authored with Alan Rucker. So she's been writing, speaking about Italian food, teaching Italian food for many years. She has also authored several books for William Sonoma. Those are really gorgeous, beautiful books, by the way.
Thank you.
Savoring Italy, Essential of Italian Cooking, Mastering Pasta. Her articles have appeared in Bon Appetit, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, The Wine Spectator, The New York Times, and we could go on forever. So I'm really, really glad that she can be here, and I invited specifically because she wrote the introduction for one of the last translations, English translations of the book. As you can see, we have different copies here on the table, including a 1962 copy from Italy that somebody's been so nice to bring here for the evening. So you can see that the book is really all over the place, but we'll speak more about it later. Next is Mitchell Davis, who's the vice president of the James Beard Foundation. He's also a cookbook author, food journalist, and a scholar. He actually holds a doctorate in food studies from New York University. And among other things, he's a graduate of Cornell University School of Hotel Administration. So he traveled in Italy, France, before settling here, and he started working for the James Beard Foundation in 1993. Recently, he's launched an annual conference called The System on Our Plates about sustainability and public health in the food service industry. And he's also helped launching the foundation's Leadership Awards for leaders that work in business, government, and other aspects of the culinary world. He's also appeared on many shows on TV, and his most recent cookbook is Kitchen Sense, published in 2006, but he's also written Cook Something and The Men's Chef in 2002. We've worked together quite a few years for the summer course that NYU organized in Florence, and I helped him organize 2 conferences on the Mediterranean diet, one in Florence and one here in New York. So he's a lover of Italian food, but he's also very, very knowledgeable about it. Next, we have Cesare Casella here in New York. He almost doesn't need any introduction, but he started working in his little trattoria near Lucca, and very soon he turned the restaurant into a 1 Michelin star. So in '93, he was named executive chef here in New York at Coco Pazzo. And after that, he launched several restaurants like Toscanaccio, Beppe, Maremma, and now he's chef owner at Salumeria Rossi in the Upper West Side. He also launched the Republic of Beans, an import company for heirloom beans, grains, and spices from Italy. He's appeared also on many TV shows, and he's authored 3 cookbooks: The Diary of a Tuscan Chef, Italian Cooking for Dummies, and True Tuscan. Now he's the dean of the Italian Culinary Academy at the International Culinary Center, both here in New York and in Parma. And so he still oversees the program's development and the training of all the chefs in both sides of the Atlantic. Last but definitely not least, there's Roberto Ludovico. He's the director of the Italian Studies program at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He got his PhD in Italian at Brown University, but he's Italian, real Italian. I mean,
Unlike us.
When did you come to the States? Oh no, to Canada first.
To Canada, 1996.
So he's been also around for quite a bit. He's specialist of the 20th century and is focused on the modernism in Europe. His last book came out last year in 2010, and it's called Una farfalla chiamata Solaria, a butterfly called Solaria. And Solaria is a very important literary journal in Italy in the 20s and 30s. So he's been researching the history of Italian gastronomy and the transformation of taste from the Middle Ages to modern times. He's also given many lectures on the topic at Boston University, at Smith, at Storrs, and he's founder and director at the UMass Amherst Food and Culture Summer Program in Rome, Italy, and we actually work together on that project. So you can see that we have a lot of power here and knowledge, so I can't wait to start discussing the book. Before I start asking questions, I would like to frame a little bit the book and its origin, because maybe it's not as well known here as it is in Italy. The book, the first edition was written in 1891. And actually, yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the death of the author Pellegrino Artusi. So right now there are celebrations all over Italy, especially in Forlimpopoli, the small village where he was born in 1820, in Romagna, and in Florence, where he lived most of his life. There are celebrations in terms of cooking, conferences. There is even a walking tour between Florence and Forlimpopoli. I've just been informed there are people walking back and forth. The relevance of this anniversary for Artusi has been amplified by the fact that on March 17, it was also the 150th anniversary of the unification of Italy. So Pellegrino Artusi is very often interpreted as the first real Italian cookbook writer, in the sense he was the first writer that decided to write a cookbook that took food as Italian after the unification. So his 100th anniversary and the 150th anniversary work together very well. So now if you go to Italy, there's Artusi all over the place. And I'm very happy that we can bring a little bit of that here in New York. So the book came out in 1891, only 30 years after the unification of the country. So Italy is a pretty young country, if you think about that. It became unified during your civil war, more or less. Before that, it was not a country. It was several countries, kingdoms, all sort of dukes and lords reigned over different parts of Italy, and also several parts were occupied, for instance, by the Austrians, especially the area of Venice, Milan. So it was a very peculiar situation, and starting in 1848, the king of Piedmont in Turin decides to start this process of unification. Of course, the political unification did not mean cultural unification at all. I mean, Italians could hardly understand each other. Very often we say that the arrival of TV in 1953 did more to learn Italians how to speak Italian than years of schooling and of unification and politics, as a matter of fact. The country where Pellegrino Artusi writes is a poor country. It's deeply divided between the north and the south, with the south in pretty bad conditions. At the time, politicians were discussing the southern issue, la questione meridionale in Italian. So how could they turn these lands into something productive where people could thrive and not suffer hunger? In the north, it was a little better, but on top of this geographical division, you have to keep in mind also the class division. So the bourgeoisie and the nobles ate decently, pretty well, the nobles, while workers, both in factories and in the countryside, were really, really in bad shape. And I think that explains why at the beginning the book was not that successful. He managed to sell maybe 1,000 copies of the first edition. Over time, as the bourgeoisie became more relevant and expanded, and at the turn of the century, the situation of food becomes much better. In preparation of World War II, the government intervened, started distributing grains, controlling prices and whatnot. People can think about cooking and food in a different way, and that's when his book explodes. So this is just to give you the historical background. But I'd like to start asking Roberto a little bit, how does the book of Artusi places itself within the history of Italian cookbooks?
As a turning point.
As a turning
really
point.
As one of the events that really change Italian cuisine and the eating habits of Italians. I'm very glad that we can talk about this book today, because really it is somehow underestimated, and in the revolutionary contributions that this book brought to Italian culture in general, not only culinary culture, but to the Italian culture in general. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. Why is it that important? What is so revolutionary about the science in the kitchen and the art of eating well? Just the title is extremely inviting for the reader. The way I look at it, the book is really the end or the accomplishment of a long process of codification of the modern Italian culinary tradition. It's a bit contradictory to talk about modern and tradition within the same sentence. It's a little complicated to explain, but I'll try my best to do that. I will step back a few centuries just to put Artusi in the historic context of Italy and food and history of gastronomy. For those who study history of gastronomy, it's a fact that the golden age of Italian gastronomy was the Renaissance, the 16th century as the peak of Italian culture, when Italy was really the center of Western culture. And so was gastronomy, so were cookbooks written for the same aristocrats who sponsored Michelangelo and Raffaello, who could afford sponsoring banquets which needed this extraordinarily capable chefs. This is when a number of culinary manuals of cookbooks, extraordinarily beautiful objects as books themselves, come out in Italy. It is a cuisine that is completely different from what we imagine today. When I ask my students in the history of gastronomy class, when do you think that the Italian tradition started? And they start going back centuries and centuries. Really, we started eating like this basically since Artusi came around. So it's a short tradition. That's what I mean by modern Italian tradition, which is rooted in way back in history. That kind of cuisine, as I said, is very different from what we can imagine today. Very strong flavors, lots of spices, very sweet, strong contrasts in flavors. Sweet and sour were always juxtaposed, things that we would not really enjoy today. And yet, Italy was a pace setter, was a point of reference for all of Europe. Things started to change, however, with the 17th century. That sort of innovative style that had characterized Italian cuisine since the Middle Ages sort of faded away. And the new star rose above the horizon. That was the Nouvelle Cuisine in France at the end of the 17th century. And as an Italian, I must admit that Italy was lagging behind for a few years. We had to learn a lot from what French cuisine had to offer. That's the time, more or less, when all those funny terms, French terms, came into the Italian language. Ragout, gigot, pâté, all those terms came from the French side, from the other side of the Alps. This was not all bad for Italy because it brought new imagination, new techniques, new ways to look at food. And the 18th and the 19th century are those years is when Italy needs to negotiate its own tradition with the innovation of the Nouvelle Cuisine. It's a very positive combination. Some of the most enjoyable cookery manuals came out in the 18th century. I'm thinking of books by Francesco Leonardi or Vincenzo Corrado, which really start to introduce the cuisine as we know it today. Not exactly, but the foundations are there. Artusi came after this, came after 100, 150 years of experimentation. And it came from a completely different environment. The books by Leonardi and Corrado and the others were books that were meant for the aristocracy, for those who had 100 people working in the kitchen who served banquets for 100 people. Artusi comes from the middle class. He writes the first Italian cookery manual for the middle class, from the middle class, from that perspective. And this is what is extraordinarily interesting. During this period when Italy needs to, or attempts or tries to negotiate and introduce the French technique onto the Italian tradition, are interesting because when this process starts, one would think that they would go back to Bartolomeo Scappi, the big names of the 16th century. Rather, they start introducing, bringing back the more popular tradition, not the cuisine of spices and sugar, but the cuisine of vegetables and fresh herbs, like the one that I'm smelling and happily enjoying at this very moment. Artusi brings this process one step further because he's an extremely knowledgeable person. He's an upper bourgeois himself, very well educated, who is really a follower of good things, of beauty in general. Beauty and balance are the main criterion that Artusi uses. So he knows everything about the Italian tradition from the Middle Ages until the very recent times. He had a friend, Olindo Guerrini, who was a librarian at the University of Bologna, who fed him books, who would pass him all these beautiful books, and he was very knowledgeable in this field. He knew the French cuisine, and he started mingling the two together, putting the two together. And at the same time, he came from the middle class. And therefore, the combination of these three elements made this miracle that is the science in the kitchen and the art of eating well. His book is not the first one that really addresses the cuisine Italian cuisine for the Middle Ages, for the middle class. But he does it in a different way. Books were published before Artusi in the 19th century, but they were rather different because either they came from chefs or cooks who worked in the kitchen, for instance, of the royal family in Italy. I'm thinking of Giovanni Vailardi, or who worked for noble families in Milan, for instance. The other book I'm thinking of is the one by Giuseppe Sorbiati. These books, these cooks wrote books that were extremely popular at the time, but they still were totally oriented towards rich people, towards the aristocracy. After a decade or two that their books came out, they realized that that was not really the kind of books that Italy needed at that time. And therefore, they wrote other books that were adaptations of their aristocratic cuisine towards the upper middle class. But the imprint of these books was still that of a family which would have servants, cooks, large amounts of money. This is the main difference. This is why Artusi conceives a completely different way of looking at a cookbook. He takes that tradition that was the lower classes tradition that was underlying all of Italian history, but was unregistered, was not written, obviously, because those people could not eat, let alone read and write. And he builds on that, and he caters to the needs of the newly emerging Italian middle class. and the results are extraordinary.
I'd like to ask Michele, from the point of view of a cookbook author, after so many years, this person writes at the end of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
From your point of view, which is very specific,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel about the book? How, reading it, the recipes, the language, the tone?
Well, I'm very, very impressed with Artusi's work. A number of years ago, I went to a cookbook authors conference, and the keynote speaker asked the audience a question, and she said, "Why are cookbooks like dairy products?" And the answer was, because they have a shelf life of 1 week to 10 days. So if that is true, if cookbooks written nowadays don't last very long, people are always moving on to the next best thing, why is it that Artusi's book is so successful even today? I've read it and I've used it for many, many years. I have many different versions of it, different variations, both in Italian and in English, and it's indispensable in my kitchen. Why? What I find about, what I think is so refreshing about the book, and why it still resonates for me today, is Artusi's tone. I feel as if when I read Artusi that he is speaking to me as an equal. He doesn't talk down to his reader. He's very anecdotal. He tells wonderful, charming stories about the food, about people he's met, about the times, and he has a very amusing way of speaking. For example, one of my quotes that I loved was this one, when he's talking about substituting ingredients, and he says, even if you don't have a horse, try to get your donkey to trot, which I think is really a cute way of saying, you know, use what you've got and don't hesitate. I feel like when I read Artusi that he's like a dear uncle, and we're having this telephone conversation, and my uncle is a great cook, and he has a lot to share with me, but he always makes me feel very good about it. His recipes, not all of them are useful, are usable. I mean, I'm not going to cook coot, for example, as one of the ingredients that he uses. I didn't even know what that was. It's a bird, it's a fish bird, he calls it. Thrushes or peacock. I mean, there are lots of things that we don't cook and eat today. But I still find the book inspiring because there are a lot of recipes that we do eat. And that one of my favorites, for example, is a roast loin of pork in milk. And he talks about that recipe. I've used, and with attribution, a recipe for his potato salad, which I adore. It's potatoes, pickled onions, peppers, and anchovies, and it's very, very delicious. He has recipes for veal and marsala, familiar things. And there was, I just came across one that I hadn't noted before, and it was for spaghetti with bacon, peas, garlic, celery, and parsley. Now, who wouldn't mind going home to dinner, you know, for something like that? No, he doesn't give you cooking times or pan sizes or quantities in many cases, but the book is an inspirational book for me. So I think that for Italian cooks in particular who are comfortable with their own cuisine, who don't need the specific instructions that we Americans have come to expect, it's still a very, very useful book.
Yeah. And I want to point out, and then I want to ask Cesare his point of view as a chef and also as a teacher of Italian cuisine. I want to point out that the book grew. It was a live book. He started with something like 490 recipes, and then as the book grew in popularity, people started sending him recipes from all over the country. And he had correspondence with housewives all over the place, and the book grew to 790 recipes, which is the present day size of it. So it's a book that it's alive, that it grew as much as it could, and it keeps on living. So I wanted to ask Cesare, from the chef point of view, as an Italian chef, how do you relate to Artusi?
Artusi, I think they are the book is a 1891. Maybe it's a more actual now, you know, in the 1891. Because if they show how there was the life there, all these recipes are not from himself too, it's from many people that they send it to him. Most of the recipe, I think, fall in the ingredients. They are from Emilia-Romagna, Tuscany, where he was there. At that time, if he printed in 1891, I think there was a minimum 10, 15, 20 years before a lot of these recipes they started to put in the side. There wasn't too many people they know to read. The people they know to cook and send information to him. So like there was the noble, the aristocratic family, because the chef 90% there was a French, or there was a French influence. Then was the law people, because they don't know how to write, and then a lot of these recipes they send it to him. So they talk about the life there was at that time in Italy, but in the middle class family. I believe this is the cookbook. It's more the people they read the book like a reading book and not like a cookbook, like recipes, because it's a fun reading this book. But at the same time, they give a lot of idea. They give think if you close your eyes, you read a lot of these recipes, you feel to be in that part of the Italy, because it don't change too much. Today, when they're in the English traduction, maybe they lose a little bit because there was more in the 2008, I don't know when they come out. But it's many times I take the book and I read only to come me more idea. But for example, a couple of weeks ago, I took 15 different recipes from this book. I give it to my cooks in the kitchen. I think they have 500 questions about each recipes because they are known in the way, the ingredients, and in the way it's a nice reading, and they make you happy. And this is something, and make it happy, think what they cook, and maybe that you change your recipes because it's not what you want to cook. I think it's a very important document about the Italian cooking because they told you what there was at that time. I don't think from a point of view the professional chef, they use like a basic the recipes, especially because at that time I was in the school in 1975 in the cooking school, and in Italy there are different systems. The cooking school is 3 years you go in the school for cooking. In the book, the curriculum that was in French, and this 1975. The book that you use normally in the until the 90, the 80, there was a Pellegrino. Pellegrino is a classic of the French cuisine. I believe that the Italian cuisine, the Artusi, the start, but not in the professional way, the chef, because there was a different, because remember, the 1891, after that there was the war. There was the unification of Italy, yes, but there was a Regno d'Italia. And then there was the war 1915 through 1945, because between the war. And the people that was really too much careful about what there was in the shelf, the food. There was already difficult to find some food. But I believe many family they used in that time too, because there was like a happy book for reading to learn what is the Italian food.
I think what Cesare pointed out is very, very important. Despite the title, the Science in the Kitchen, it's not a scientific book. So it gives up any pretense of professionality, of being, a masculine field of science and research. But actually, it builds on the experience of these women that shared their recipes with him. And the style that he adopts is very much the style that you learn while you cook in the kitchen. Your mother doesn't tell you exactly how much flour you want to put in a recipe. She tells you, how much it's enough. At least Italian mothers do that. I'm not sure about
No, but
American
it's a. First of all, I think the Italian cuisine is a cuisine of the women, the grandma, the mother, but in professional way. If we look at today, to the 3-star Michelin in Italy, they are from women. And then today too, if you look at Pinchiori, you look at the Pescatore, Le Calandre. In France, you don't find so many 3-star women chefs. So it's very interesting because the Italian food is more from the soul, from the heart. And this book is in this way. The French, they have a different way.
different approach.
You'd never know he was born in Iowa, would you?
Mitchell, talking about the heart of the book, we were talking before, and you said that you found some of James Beard in the book. What did you mean by that? I was very intrigued by it.
Sure. Thank you, Fabio, for inviting me to participate with this great panel. And thank you for sending me back to Artusi, in fact, because that's what it did. And in reading through the book again, which it had been many years, one of the things that struck me was that this isn't really a cookbook. I mean, forgive me, Uncle Pellegrino, but I don't have any indication here that he's cooked any of these things ever, nor would he, as a wealthy silk merchant in Florence in 1890, ever have the opportunity necessarily to do that. But what it is a real window into a culture that we resonate with as Italian food culture, more than it is about Italian recipes or Italian dishes. Not that you won't find things that are familiar as you flip through. It makes you hungry to read about them and to read the stories and to read about the beautiful and well-mannered Mrs. Adelaide, I guess, I don't know what it would be translated, who asked me to tell you about her most delicately flavored timbale. I mean, it is as cookbooks. It is as Italian to cookbooks as Escoffier is to French cookbooks. And that's often a comparison that's made. It's an unfair comparison, except that the two great books of the same time, Escoffier written considerably later, or maybe 15 years later. But when you think of the Guide Culinaire, that was a codification, a scientific codification of sorts, although there are no recipes in there either, which people forget, because everyone is so well trained to know what was supposed to be done. You would just say, these 6 things, go do it, this sauce. I mean, a real window into French culture, you could say, and an attempt to even do that being a French project. They did write the encyclopedias and try to put all knowledge that was possible in a book. And this is, as Fabio said, and I think as Cesare, and as we would all agree, really a window into that thing that is so different from France that when we go to Italy, we feel in a restaurant or in a home at a meal, an emotional resonance, a listening, almost, I mean, part of the reason I think it wasn't just radical that it was written in Italian, which was really Tuscan dialect until a few years before this book was written, but I think it was also radical that it was written as that language was spoken, which is why it feels like you're in the kitchen with Uncle Pellegrino, because he's telling these stories. But as Fabio mentioned, Italian food is an oral tradition. It happens in the kitchen between mother and daughter more often than mother and son, but also between mother and son and mother and her sister and her family in a way that I think we sense when we're there, and kind of part of the reason that it never tastes as good when you're not there. There's something about being immersed in this culture that's so warm and enveloping, I think, that comes out in the book. It's to me, what struck me in this process was, so here's a guy who is clearly well-educated, well-traveled, well-eaten, although there's a heavy emphasis on Emilia-Romagna, Romagna, and Tuscany, which resonates with us today because that's where our emphases are when we think of Italian food. We are thinking of Tuscany, we are thinking of Bologna, so that doesn't seem out of place. But the storytelling, the editorializing, that's what reminded me of James Beard. James Beard wrote 26 cookbooks, but in 1972 he wrote American Cookery. And American Cookery has headnotes in it that you could never write, which are, oh, this is a dish that they like somewhere, I don't understand why. You could not put that in a cookbook today. You would never add that recipe. An editor would take it out. But there's some of that in here. The stories of, well, so-and-so wanted me to tell you how she makes such and such. I would never do it this way. You know, or you know, there's that element. And what I think is interesting is if you map the two of them on each other, here's Artusi writing a book, you know, when a whole country is attempting to cohere. And let's not forget that the mass migrations largely the result of starvation were going on right at the time, from 1880 through to people were leaving Italy for food right up until some of our times. So there's this trying to put a country together, in a sense, and Beard was trying to put a cuisine together. I mean, obviously America had a strong culture by 1972, strong enough that well, whatever, we won't go on what was going on in 1972, but had a percolating, a burgeoning food culture that the idea of American cookery as a topic was as radical as the idea of Italy as a country, you could argue. Obviously, it's apples and oranges, but that to me, the similarity in those projects, trying to pull these disparate pieces together, in Artusi's sense, the people, not so much the food, although also the food, and in Beard's sense, the food, to try to make them fit into something that was a book that would say something about who they were and what they ate, was what I thought, struck me in this reading of Artusi for this panel.
And I think that's a very interesting element. There's something in the book that makes it last long. People go back and find new things and have fun with it. But there is one element there that we have not discussed because it's very much about Italian. I'd like Roberto to give you an idea of that. How this book was important to create a language for all the people in Italy to talk about food.
Well, this book is really a cookbook and a piece of literature. It has these two facets, and that's the combination of the two is what makes it so long-lasting. Artusi faced a serious issue. He had to unify or give a unitary idea of Italian cuisine, which is not easy. And yet he succeeded quite well in doing that. And he needed a tool to tell the story. He needed a language that everybody could understand. You can imagine that the same ingredient, the same dish, if it's cooked from one town to the other, that's a different name. So which name, which language was he supposed to use? It is interesting, the fact that Artusi's library, when he died, had 578 books. 26 of them were dictionaries and books about language. It doesn't seem a lot, but comparatively, relatively, it's a very large number. So he was doing language research. And he had only one novel. He had 5 cookbooks, French, which is a testimony of the originality of his work and how much he relied upon libraries. And one novel, which was Alessandro Manzoni's I Promessi Sposi, The Betrothed, which is the novel that really set the Italian language for the novel, for a modern novel. Manzoni had to rewrite the book 2 or 3 times in order to come to something that could sound somehow standard Italian. He obviously used the Tuscan language to do that. Artusi had only this book in his library. So he was doing exactly the same thing and trying to translate that experience that Manzoni had in 1927, 1940, into the writing of a cookery manual. And he does it in a very practical manner. He uses Tuscan. But every time he introduces a term that is typically Tuscan, he explains what it is and what other languages, other dialects would use instead, in order to mediate the understanding from other people, because he really had a national audience in mind. And there's another fact. The book got bigger and bigger as the new editions were published, as Fabio was saying. And he added more recipes and rarely touched or revised the ones that were in the previous editions in terms of content, technique, ingredients, measurements, or whatever. But he very often reviewed the language, very much like a poet would do when a new edition of a book comes out, of a collected poems comes out. There are always variants, changes that the author does to improve the language, to improve the quality of his own poetry, of his own literature. Artusi revised his language more than he revised his recipes, and that tells you a lot about how much he cared about it. It's a book that comes not from a professional cook, but it comes from a man of letters. Artusi had published already a book on two books and two 19th century poets, Ugo Foscolo and Giuseppe Giusti. So it was not a very successful literary critic, but that's where his heart and soul were, and at the dining table. So put those two together and you get the science in the kitchen.
And it's interesting how Artusi marks a turning point in Italian cuisine, but it's not the end of the evolution of Italian cuisine as we know it now. If you look at his book, for instance, the word pizza, even pizza napoletana, is not used in the sense of what we know as pizza. It was sort of a dessert. It was sweet with butter and eggs and almonds. He used pizza in the sense that was used before in the past from the 16th, the 17th century. I wanted to show you something. The magazine I used to work for published a special issue on the 150th anniversary. And so they asked to the readers to indicate what are the dishes that, according to them, are most significative of what Italian cuisine is. And the results are extremely interesting. The first one with 53% of votes was Parmigiano Reggiano. You have olive oil. Number 3, pizza napoletana. And it's interesting that the dish that many Italians feel as quintessentially Italian was not even in the book, because at the time when he wrote, pizza napoletana was so limited to a specific area that he had no idea. For him, pizza napoletana was the pizza that was in the cookbooks from the 16th and the 17th century. And the whole series is very interesting. We have mozzarella di bufala, of which, of course, he had no idea, because it was a very local product. You have to think that when Artusi writes, food distribution in Italy is a mess. It doesn't work. Warehousing was horrible. Taxes to go from one area to the other were really, really high. So foods tend to become really regional. So he does not know, and that's maybe one of the reasons why he focuses on the cooking of Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna. And then you have rice, you have bread, you have spaghetti. It's interesting that spaghetti comes after rice. And panettone, which of course he didn't know, la fiorentina, pesto alla genovese. You see that the culinary identity of Italians now is completely different from what Artusi could think of Italian food. There are lasagne, la matriciana. Of course, Artusi had no idea what a matriciana was. It's a dish from a tiny village not far from Rome. How could he know? But the Italian cuisine has really changed, but what he did was to make Italians able to talk to each other and understand what they were doing. And that's major. I mean, to this day in Italy, you might be aware of the fact that if you go to Turin, animals are butchered in certain ways and the pieces are called in certain ways. In Rome, we call them in different ways because the animal is butchered differently. It's extremely complicated. So the poor guy in 1891 really did what he could do. But in terms of this, so it's a historical book. It's dated, but it's still very much loved and read. Any of you we've already talked about this, but why do you think that happened, and what do you think will happen to the book in the future? Will it keep on being read? Will cookbook authors be inspired by it? Will chefs, even if they cannot use it, be inspired by it? Or it's going to be sort of something that is nice to read, but it will stay where it is?
I think that the book will continue to be read for inspiration, much as I've enjoyed it over the years. It does have close to 800 recipes and brilliant ideas in between. Some of them not so good, some of them not so timely, but I think that it's become a classic, and it will continue in that role as a classic. I don't cook for my joy of cooking very much anymore, but I have to have it on my shelf. And it's going to be in one of those historical books that are useful for research or essential for research to understand where we are today. At a time when people are doing molecular gastronomy and those crazy foams and scientific techniques, I think it's good to remain grounded by reading Artusi.
Any other of the speakers have thoughts about it?
I think the Artusi don't go nowhere. No, it's, I repeat, it's a happy cookbook that you don't use like a cookbook. You use it to make it, after you read, you have more idea. You going to have more inspiration what you want to do. I think the Talismano della Felicità, il Pelle Prate, Cucchiaio d'Argento, they're going to sell, they're going to have less people reading that, no Artusi. Because Artusi, it's a life, it's a truth. This man, this book, not for money, for to sell book. And if I think he did it because he believed in this book. He believed, he put his energy positive, and this you find that because you don't find nobody that print his book. He spend his money. He put the way that you want. There wasn't much care for who was reading in the beginning. It was because he wanted to enjoy. Was looking for this to make him money.
He did a lot of money. He made a lot of money with it.
No, in the beginning, he was believing the project. And I think this book, his life going to continue to give inspiration, chef and non-chef.
Well, I think it sets a sort of ABC of Italian cuisine. For Artusi, everything starts with a soffritto, with celery, carrot, parsley, onion, chopped up and stir-fried in butter or olive oil or lardon. So that is in the genes now of Italian cooks, home cooks, and cooks like Cesare, I think. So you need to take that ABC and take it one step forward and use your imagination in combining that sort of benchmark that Artusi set at a time when there was not such a thing. What will survive, Fabio, do you allow me to read 3 lines from Artusi? Sure. Is Artusi's language that we will always go back to. There once was a priest from Romagna who stuck his nose into everything, busybodied his way into families, trying to interfere in every domestic matter. Still, he was an honest fellow, and since more good than ill, came of his zeal, people let him carry on in his usual style, but popular wit dubbed him Don Pomodoro, Father Tomato, since tomatoes are always ubiquitous. Now, would you believe that this is the beginning of salsa di pomodoro, tomato sauce? Would you continue to read this recipe and the next page and the following page? This is really a book that belongs to the kitchen shelf as much as it belongs to your library, to your night table, to your coffee table, something that you can open at any page randomly and enjoy its reading and get hungry.
I'm going to say something a little radical sitting here with a bunch of real Italians from Italy instead of just the Italophile in me. In 1992, just a year before I came to the Beard Foundation, I was a guinea pig on a project from there was several regional governments of Italy, especially Piedmont, and they brought a bunch of American cooks over there, 29 of us, because one of them couldn't go. And they wanted to show us what real Italian food was. For 6 months we were there, and they paraded every great chef in Italy from all over the country in front of us. It was dreamy, and to tell the story, it was a dream. It was actually a nightmare, but that's a whole other story. You don't want to be a guinea pig to anything in Italy, actually. But it was this amazing experience. But one of the things that was very evident in that, and which speaks to your experience in the 70s in a cooking school, was how much all of these chefs wanted to stand in front of us and show us how they could make French food, just like French chefs. And I'm not kidding. We saw more puff pastry, and you can argue that they learned it first or they made it first, but they weren't showing it to us for that reason. They were showing it to us because they also had learned the great recipes and dishes of Escoffier, and their chefs were as good as those in France. And the paradox of Italian food, I find, is that everywhere outside of Italy, everyone thinks it's the greatest cuisine on earth. There is not a new restaurant in New York that is not Italian in the last 2 years. When someone asks you to recommend something, it's always an Italian restaurant. We don't live in Italy, actually. Anyway. But when you are there, and I can only speak to food, but I have a feeling there are some other things going on, there is always this, a debate over an incredible meal you could not even find to pay for in one of these new restaurants in New York if you tried, that is so incredible, but there's always this sense that, well, we can do it too, or we're just as good, or we're whatever when it comes to food. And one of the things that I think Artusi does, and the reason that every Italian has it on a shelf, is it shows that actually we had something here long ago, that we have a tradition of that perhaps is not as easily replicable, or that is not as easy to use to create a curriculum, you might know that more than anybody, to then send people off around the world to go make this thing just as it was done here, but that we have a stake in this conversation, in addition, that is more like the food that we know as Italian, even if it's not exactly the same, and closer than it would have been in the 16th century cookbooks, that says that we have this object, this important point in history, well written, and it's ours, and it's something that we can be proud of. And pride is a hugely important thing in Italian culture, and I think it's one of the reasons that it endures, and also what we might get out of it from reading it, not as Italians, not from inside that culture, but another one of those things that we resonate with.
No, that's absolutely true. I think that's the reason why the book is being read and talked about right now during the 150th anniversary. It's exactly that. So we do have a cuisine, and it has a history, and we can be proud of it. Maybe the history is changing, maybe the cuisine is changing, but it's there. I quite agree with you. We've been speaking for more than an hour. Maybe it would be time to open the floor for questions. We have a couple of microphones if somebody's interested. You have somebody here and then somebody there.
Perché la scienza?
Why science? We want to try to answer that?
It's 1891. It's positivism. It's science all over. Science can do everything and anything. And there's this, obviously, it needs to be balanced with art, which is the other side of the coin, which is really what Artusi is interested in. But that is the culture he comes from. Positivism is what he grew up in, and this strong belief in reason and science. Art, obviously, is what relates better for us to cuisine, but that's I believe,
And
the
there's
reason
also
why.
a section where he explains what to eat where you're not feeling too well. So there were indications of some medicinal use of food, which is also very, very old tradition in Italy, goes back to the Middle Ages. So there was science in this sense, but it's maybe 3 pages in the whole book. So
But, yeah, I mean, it also, to me, and maybe not to him, but it resonates with Briat Savarin, the Physiologie du goût. It's from the same moment at a different, a few years earlier, but in a tradition of, let's make this food thing real, important.
he, in his preface, is very clear about that. It's like we're thinking too much, we get all nervous, and we maybe overuse our brain. Why don't we go back and use the other senses? Why don't we go back and use the flavors and smell? So even in that desire to go beyond the intellectualism of the brain, there was this sense of, okay, this can be scientific. So there are different senses. So he tries to do that, but as Uncle Pellegrino, as somebody was saying, we have a question over there.
My question is it a popular book in Italian households for people who are interested in food per se? Like now where everybody has
never been out
Julia
of print.
Child's
Yeah.
book.
It's always reprinted.
It's never been out of print. I think the most popular book is The Silver Spoon, Il Cucchiaio d'Argento, in terms of numbers of books sold, which dates from the 50s and has grown, is more the joy of cooking, you might say, but...
It's it's very much, and now since the copyright is over, you can download it for free off the internet in Italian because there is no translation. There are copyrights on the translation, but the original is copyright free. And lots of people are just,
But
getting
the
it like that.
Argento, there was a sold more. You know why? Because it was a wedding gift.
Yes, everyone gets one, the first,
Is there any kind of reference in there about, I know there was a book published many years ago about the secret recipes of the Pope. Guess had something to do with being secretive.
There are several references to, I don't think popes, but religion in general, and they're not very friendly. Artusi was an anarchist, non-religious, I could say, totally. Yes, it was not. It didn't have religion and church in great sympathy.
There's a question over here.
I wanted to know who translated the book into English, and does it lose anything in the translation from the original Italian into English?
Michele?
Well, the edition that I wrote the intro to, the translator, it's been translated many different times, and this one is translated by Martha Bacca and Stefan Sartarelli. And one of the things that is not in this edition that is in the original edition and in many of the Italian editions, and I understand that it was removed during Mussolini's reign, was his reference to, a favorable reference to Jewish cooking. He talks about eggplant, aubergine, and he refers to it as being very palatable and very much used in Jewish kitchens. And he also says, which I thought was very funny, the aubergine or eggplant is not a vegetable to be scorned, for it causes neither flatulence nor indigestion. And then he goes on to talk about how it's much used in the Jewish kitchen, and that the Jewish cook is very creative and clever in their use of aubergine. But that was removed about the time of the fascist regime in Italy, and it's not in this current edition that was done just a few years ago. So it's.
What's the most recent edition?
I think this is.
Yeah.
What year is that?
2004. I believe it's 2004. And it was done by the University of Toronto Press. And it's 2004. I'll double check.
This,
This
No.
one, no.
In
this one
Italian.
you have- This is in
yeah.
English.
Mine
This
is in English
version.
from 1996, and actually, I lost the page, but there's, I both love and hate this translation. It has a lot of annotations from the translator, one of which I just saw and now I can't find, but it was for making porcini soccetto under vinegar, pickled porcini mushrooms, and he gives his whole recipe, and then there's a little italicized version that said, whatever you do, don't use garlic because it has botulism and you'll die, is basically what it says. I just thought, this is the merging of two cultures here in one book, you know, not just... It's funny.
Just to finish your question, sorry to point, this English translation was first published by Mercilio Publishers in 1997. But this edition is published by the Lorenzo da Ponte Italian Library, University of Toronto Press, 2003. So it was a reprint of an earlier translation.
But anyway, it's a lot for me, it's a lot of difference when you read in English and read in Italian, because the spirit that you can change. Kyle is very good. He lives in Florence. He's American. He did, I think, a great job. Luigi Ballerini, it's historical. It's a great translation, but I believe that when you read it, because it's not about the recipes, it's about the story. The moment that you are there and you close your eyes and you have this imagination. In the English translation, they lose a little.
Like any book.
Oh, there's,
Yeah, thank you. Hi. First of all, thank you. Wonderful panel. I'd love to learn a little bit about the business and marketing distribution of the book when it originally came out, and also, you also mentioned he was very successful, and then also with all the women who sent in things, I'm curious if that was the first time that's really been done, in terms of getting people involved, and then the whole grassroots marketing. Thank you.
As far as I know, yes, it is the first. Does anybody know about any other? No, not really. Actually, I cannot even think of anything happening shortly after Artusi adopting that same technique. Artusi self-published the book. Nobody would pick it up. No publisher. He self-published it, and he printed 1,000 copies in 1991. And he sold them all from his house. People would send him money, and he would send the book back. And he continued to do so until he died. And then he passed into the hands, well, then he used Bemporat, I think, as a distributor. But he always paid for the printing. By the time he died, he'd sold 52,000 copies, which for Italy in 1891 or in 1911 at a point, it was a lot, considering the illiteracy rate.
You know what else I think is very interesting is that he was 71 years old when the book was published, which I think is really awesome. That and then for the next 20 years that he lived, this was his passion, and probably kept him going.
yeah.
Okay. So it was originally published in 1891. When did it reach its fullest iteration, meaning there were recipes added? You said he was well-traveled, but did he take research trips for this book, or was it all through correspondence?
No, it was mostly through correspondence.
Okay. And secondly...
He traveled basically between Tuscany and Romagna.
Okay. He addresses women several times throughout the book, but does he ever directly address men?
He tells stories from men. He doesn't...
Yeah, not as cooks. He
Yeah, not as
assumes that the
cooks,
person
yeah.
who's cooking is a woman. He had
As
a
you would today.
female cook in his household, a helper.
Here and then.
This is the money question. If he published this at 71, was he living the life of a bourgeois gentleman for the major part of his life?
He was a banker.
Okay. A banker?
A banker.
Okay.
And what I wanted to ask is, if it was published when he was 71, was the book his life's work? I mean, did he spend, 30 years, 40 years working on it, or was it sort of the last few years?
No, I don't think so.
No, I think it was a hobby.
It seems like a vast amount of work,
Yeah. But I think it was a hobby along with his interest in poetry and his profession. And it was, as you said, he was a lover of all things beautiful and a very cultured man. And this was one of his many interests.
I was just wondering if you think that cookbooks now are almost too scientific. You mentioned about the casual language in his book and in the James Beard book. Do you think we're missing that now? And even with the ingredient lists, really the only thing I can think of that we trust our audience with is salt. You say season to taste, but everything else is so specific. And I know chefs use recipes as guidelines depending on the sweetness of certain ingredients and how they actually come to them. But as far as the home cook, they really rely on these very specific guidelines. And I'm just wondering if you think that will ever change.
I don't think it will change until people really get comfortable in the kitchen and really learn to cook. It's one thing to follow a recipe slavishly, but you don't really know how to cook. Chances are, if it's a simple enough recipe, the instructions are good enough, you could probably have a good result. But you need to know how to cook to be released from that kind of specific recipe.
And I do think there are some attempts even recently in books that are about breaking free of the tyranny of the recipe, and you see all that sort of stuff going on. But I do think we're in an interesting transition when it comes to cookbooks and cooking. I'm not the one that you always hear about necessarily, but as this is going to become more of a cooking device than this, I think the slavish sort of detail of a cookbook might disappear, and they will assume their probably more normal role or more popular role of being fantasies like watching TV is fantasies. You never get the details of a recipe on TV, and yet millions of people watch the Food Network. And I think cookbooks are going to be a little more like those sorts of objects. And these are going to be, or iPads or whatever it is that you have, are going to be what you're cooking from. I already do cook from this more than this.
If I may add something, that narrative storytelling component of the book is more than just form. That is part of the conviviality of the way Artusi perceived food and dining and cooking. So those are strictly connected, because the reason why he writes that way, because the reason why he tells stories is because that's what you do at the table. So the conviviality of the book corresponds to the actual perception of food in Italian culture.
In fact, I think the book is I don't know how much he was cooking. I think he was more eating. No, in the way they talk all the time, the other people cooking, on the idea that come inside, the way they talk about, I think he was curious, and I still believe they did this book like his passion, but for to let know his passion and how much he was know about the food, they put it together. This never before did something like this, and then same time like people that like to build a place in the museum and with the name. I think he did in the same way to invest his money, because if you think that everybody went with the people that publish Ugo Foscolo, then publish his book. Who going to read this book, your book? But he did it because he was a believer. For that, this never go away. Stay there.
I feel I have to say James Beard was a great cook and cooked all of his recipes.
One last question.
I know he's often praised as sort of codifying a Italian culinary canon, but in a country that is so clearly still based on regional cuisine, is that sort of a contradiction, or is there a complement there?
I know. I think Italy is still in the regional ingredients, and I think the Italian cuisine started very young, is because it's only from the 70s, 80s we have Italian cuisine, because the chef from Sicily used radicchio trevisano, but before that it's a very regional. This, it's an example that you put it together all this cuisine, but because there was people that send these recipes. Like he told before, there was travel too much, is from personal experience. And I think the Italian cuisine, they started when the people, they started to see more far away where they are. Today still, if you go in Sicily, in season the radicchio di Trevisano is maybe more easy to find in New York than now in Palermo. So it's a very difficult, but I think, what I try to teach at the school is that one way the Italian cuisine is that the philosophy and the thinking, the simplicity, and then they're going to be regional when you use the product of that area. But we need, for me, I need to stop to think that we have 20 different regions where the Italian food is more important than that, because we have this energy, these ingredients, they are so different, and they make the different cuisine, because the ingredients, they are so different from every region, because the influence from everybody from Sicily to Alto Adige, they are, I don't know, it's not way that you possible to think in the US so much different. One, no, they are so cold, the color so gray in the north, and they're so happy color, and a very lively color in the south. But if you base, in the north is a cabbage, in the south a tomato, respect what is the life. That is I think these, they are not really the divide, but they unify.
When we talk about unifying regional cuisine, we don't mean making it all the same, but letting people know what the other regions do. And for that, you need a language to do that. But think of it as a federalism in the book.
All right, thank you everybody for participating. Thank you to the speakers. It's been a great panel. If you're interested in our events, you can sign up, leave your email so that we can keep you informed. And also there are some of our books there for sales if anybody's interested. And thank you again for coming.